program. Go ahead and keep getting pizza and finding seats. There's lots of chairs, empty chairs all over the place. You might have to get to know people a little better.
It's looking right at
So welcome everyone. This is the 14th annual Constitution Day celebration at NMSU-A. And I'm really thrilled for this year's celebration. The topic is incredibly timely right now. In fact, the New York Times just had this huge article about fake news and the Russians and all kinds of good stuff. So I want to introduce our panel. We have a distinguished panel today. To my left is Professor David Overstreet, who teaches criminal justice, paralegal studies, and directs those programs as well. And then next to him is Matt Wade. I'm sorry, I'm nervous. Is Matt Wade, and he is a domestic relations hearing officer here in Alamogordo in Otero County. And next to Matt is Becky Covassier, who is a litigator. So we have three attorneys who are very familiar with the Constitution and will help us in our topic. So the topic today is fake news. Everyone's heard this. It's free speech versus fake news. So just to go over a few points, to give us all a chance to be on the same page. What is fake news? Fake news are reports about untrue events or reports about real events that are significantly and deliberately distorted in order to promote a political agenda. What is not fake news are reports or accounts. Reports or accounts are not automatically fake news just because the reports are on MSNBC, NBC, Fox, or CNN. No major network news only broadcasts fake news. Moreover, reports are not fake news just because they are inconsistent with our existing opinions, paint our side in a negative light, or spin facts in a way that we do not like. And why should we care? Fake news has the potential to significantly impact the foundations of our democracy, and I believe we are seeing this happen right now by undermining our institutions, leaders, and elections. So now I want to turn this over to Mr. David Overstreet, who will continue.
All right, thank you. And I really want to thank the university and all the folks who make this stuff happen. I just have to show up and talk, which is not super complicated. So I appreciate you guys making that happen for us. When we had the topic and made the flyer, it was really cool. But then when we started trying to kind of narrow it, I felt like we were drinking out of a fire hose in terms of all the different topics and all the different ways it can be interpreted. So we tried to narrow it down a little bit. So, like Kim said, fake news is certainly significant. It's pervasive. And one of the things about fake news, when you aren't constrained by the facts, you can design a story in the digital age that will get spread much faster and much farther than if you're stuck with the boring old facts. Now, how are we going to handle that as a society? There's a couple of easy solutions that don't impact the Constitution significantly. One is we can all take her government class and be informed citizens. That'd be helpful. And then when our uncle posts something on Facebook, we maybe put it in Google and see if it's true. And I would encourage everybody to do that. But sadly, even with an open admissions policy, we can't get everybody in her government class. The other thing we can do is kind of a market reaction. Because the value of those platforms, which is in the billions in terms of Facebook and Twitter and Snapchat, their value is going to go down if people don't use it, and if they find that why should I go there if the stuff is going to be made up and not true? just because it validates what I think anyway about me and my side. All right, so there is kind of a market force regulation that those companies are going to say, okay, you know, we have a policy that says you can't be a bully, you can't promote hate speech, you can't continually promote stuff that's hateful, derisive, and false. We warn you, you sign an agreement, and so now we take you off. So that would be great, and is not particularly offensive to the Constitution. Okay? But what we're going to try to deal with is, okay, what can the government do about that? Which raises those free speech issues directly. You can have the United States Fake News Commission that before every post goes online, it has to get approved by a majority of the, yes, Kari's already shaking her head. So that's probably not going to work, but we can do something maybe. You can fine or sanction those platforms who promote it. You can fine or sanction users that post it or share it. In terms of, well, I can say what I want, we can't go fire in a theater, right? So where are those lines? So you have, the first issue constitutionally is whether or not these social media platforms are a public forum, or is it more of a private or non-public forum? Is it closer to a city park or a shopping mall? And that makes an impact on how much government regulation the case law would allow them to do. And then also, what type of regulation is it? Is it a content-based restriction? You know, the read test, I boil it down to, is if you have to read the sign to know if it's permitted to restrict it, then the restriction's probably not going to pass strict scrutiny. Because if I have to read it to know you shouldn't hold that sign up, then I probably can't ban you from signing it if you're in a public place. But kind of like campaign contributions, can we require disclosure? Who's paying for it? Who's posting it? And if it's an election related, is there a foreign connection? And how deep down that rabbit hole would you have to go to prove that? So those are kind of some of the fun areas that we can talk about today that are in the realm of that would be helpful for society to get rid of, but it might impact some free speech issues. Before I hand it over to questions, or if the other panelists want to say something, you know, this is not a new problem. Eldridge Jerry, who most people don't know, but if you've heard the expression gerrymandering, that's that guy. So he signed the Declaration of Independence, he signed the Articles of Confederation, he was not a huge fan of government. And one of the quotes because they were talking about the Bill of Rights and the freedom of the press, which is in there, and he kind of thought that was important. He wasn't going to sign the Constitution because he didn't have the freedom of press. And so, I don't want to misquote him. He said, because he was from Massachusetts, he's back home, talking about how people were being manipulated back home. He was also behind in the polls, but that could just be a coincidence. The people do not lack virtue, but are the dupes of pretend patriots. In Massachusetts, it has been fully confirmed by experience that they are daily misled into the most baneful measures and options by the false reports circulated by designing men, which no one on the spot can refute. So it's not a new problem, but I do submit that in the digital age, it takes on some added significance because of the ability to manipulate images, video, and audio, and how tunnel visioned we are in our consumption of information. And if we're going to be informed citizens, that vulnerability is just a little too easy to exploit. It's certainly not too easy to fix. You guys want to say anything, or just wait for brain questions?
So the most protected speech is political speech, and most everything that you see in fake news can be. I mean, the picture here that was on the flyer, arguably is it's a political statement. That picture on the right is a political statement. It's not. I'm not trying to fool you. I'm trying to state my political beliefs, and so that makes it even harder for the government regulation to step in. I guess that's the lens I.
That's what the core political content, that is the most protected, for good reason.
So I just want to give you a little bit of background on the perspective that I come from. So I'm a civil litigator. Mostly what I do is contract and real estate litigation, but there are some cases that come up that I handle that involves federal civil rights issues. So there have been a few times in the federal district court in Las Cruces that I've litigated those issues. So frequently those cases, if you're in federal district court, it's because you're talking about either a federal law issue or a federal constitutional issue. Under what's called 28 U.S.C. 1983, which is part of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. So when we're talking about constitutional law, and Professor Gallagher, if you've been lucky to have a class, please take it because it's really fascinating, and it'll give you the history on constitutional protections for free speech, which hinge around, as hearing officer Wade mentioned, number one, what is speech, and this long line of precedents that come along as far as, you know, what is symbolic speech, what are spoken words, and those sorts of things. But what's kind of fundamental in all of those decisions is that the government can regulate time, place, and manner in which a person speaks, where they do it, when they do it, and how they do it, but we really limit the amount of regulations that address content and political speech, which is most fundamentally important to our government. So in that regard, I was just reminded a second ago a quote from Rudy Giuliani, who I would never normally quote, but he says, "Truth isn't truth." So when we're talking about regulating speech, we're talking about who gets to say what the truth is, but the more important question from maybe my perspective at least, is what are facts and who can say those, and do we regulate those? So.
Okay, so that gives us a lot to consider. This microphone's just been awkward, I'm sorry. I have a few questions for our panelists, if you don't mind. And so I guess I'm wondering, what are the free speech concerns raised when, because we sort of have said, well, this raises free speech concerns. What exactly are those free speech concerns that potential regulation by government of social media companies or, well, especially social media companies, what are we looking at? What's the possible violations, or how does that conflict with the First Amendment?
Let's see, in the interest of disclosing actual facts, neither one of these fine folks were scheduled to be on the panel, but we had some cancellations, so they got drafted somewhere between the last minute and really last minute. So if they're not super updated on Con Law 101, don't hold that against them. So the government can regulate speech. They can regulate political speech. Time, place, and manner is one. But a restriction that, if we assume, for today's purposes, that a social media format is either a public forum or close enough, then it would have to fall under what's called strict scrutiny. Because when the courts look at a restriction, whether it's looking at a civil rights or any other, they apply one of three levels. Strict scrutiny, which is the highest, intermediate, oddly enough, in the middle, and then rational basis, which is, if you can fog a mirror with the explanation, it's going to work. In most of these cases, that initial determination is pretty much outcome determinative. A restriction that's deemed to fall under strict scrutiny is doomed. A restriction that falls under intermediate is liable to pass. And the reason why it's just a hard standard. Strict scrutiny, you have to have a narrowly tailored restriction and a compelling state interest. I think, frankly, in this context, you can make a pretty good argument that regulating political speech is a compelling state interest and deregulating political speech is a compelling state interest. But the narrowly tailored means there can't be any other less restrictive means to do what you want. So if you think of the legislative bodies with which you are familiar and think, are they going to come up with the best solution to that problem or get kind of close? So it's really hard to meet that. Intermediate is just, it's an important governmental interest, and you have a rational way of getting there. It means it's strictly, substantially related is the exact words. So in terms of the constitutional issue by free speech, it's, well, okay, you have a restriction. Is that restriction the least restrictive means to accomplish what you want? And do you have a compelling state interest? And that's a really high bar. Not impossible, but very high. Yes?
To emphasize the significance and importance of this particular topic, take note that the state of Arizona a couple days ago passed a law, and it's going to have to pass constitutional review, but the law on its face restricts the speech of students with no clear criteria. Gives the universities the right to restrict student speech on campus.
Oh, wow.
That's horrifying.
That's going to have trouble surviving in court.
Yes,
Now,
absolutely.
Now, in terms
But the
of
fact that they passed it at all is troubling.
Arizona.
Yeah, Arizona is troubling.
it was really hot this summer. For this reason. And now some countries have done something. You know, some people, some political leaders in America have called for pulling licenses of media outlets that promulgate fake news, or you know, sanctioning journalists who promulgate fake news. But again, who is the determiner of that? Malaysia has an absolute policy now; they can bar anything they call fake news. But it's not just, you know, Filipino dictators. The UK and France are pursuing things. You know, the UK has kind of like a fake news unit. It's not quite as bad as that commission I was talking about earlier, but it's going to have the same sort of troubles.
I want to pick or go back to Becky, your last statement that you said about what are facts, and forgive me if I misquote you, and who gets to decide what are facts. And it seems to me, last week I was lucky enough to go to the Dominici conference, public policy conference in Las Cruces, and this is something that was discussed, was that the electorate can't trust they feel as though they cannot trust, and this is by pollster, so this is actual data, that people who are interviewed feel as though they cannot trust any source for facts. And so I just wondered if you could expand a little bit more about that point of what are facts and who gets to decide. I mean, where do we go from here, I guess, is what I'm wondering.
Well, I don't know that I have the complete answer to that, but I'm realizing there are a lot of lessons coming out of the Trump administration, because we have Kellyanne Conway who's saying facts aren't facts. And so it's probably something that's significantly up to debate. And you know, in federal constitutional law, we have the idea of what's the difference between fact and opinion. And those sorts of issues come up in slander and libel cases, where we're talking about one individual saying something that may be not true, or derogatory about somebody else, and that is a civil action. Somebody can sue if they say something that is either false or with reckless disregard for the truth of the matter. And then the standard, of course, is higher if we're talking about a falsehood allegedly made against a public official, where that's sort of a statement, in order to be civilly actionable, has to have been made with actual malice. So for all of you that care, that's New York Times versus Sullivan. If you want to look it up, Mr. Overstreet will give you the citation of that. But there is a difference between fact and opinion, and a lot of times it overlaps, because each individual person can receive the same information and then process it through their own biases, opinions, knowledge, experience, education, and come up with a different conclusion as to whether or not that is a fact or an opinion, the information that comes out of it. Can you regulate and somehow come up with an idea of what is a universal truth? And I don't see personally how there is a way through government regulation or state, federal government regulation, or somehow self-policing within social media sites, how we come up with a universal truth. The question is, in the case of regulating social media, how permissible limits might be placed that would prevent things that are harmful. But when we say things that are harmful, those may be things that are civilly actionable as being libelous, slanderous, or something that might constitute hate speech, which is, it can overlap with political speech as well. So that's not really amenable to a neat, tidy answer.
I think one of the hardest things too is when you look at the model that the government already uses in how to decide who should make these decisions. Like the Supreme Court right now, they're trying to. It should be the most non-political people in the entire system, but we all see that right now it is being politicized, and it may be politicized, but. Regardless, if you have somebody in charge of the government regulation of what is fake news and what is not fake news, and the president right now is calling for stronger libel laws, stronger laws anyways, and certainly, he's then calling for an interpretation of the truth, and not only do I not believe that that's freedom of speech, but then I also believe that that's so far fake news that I can sue you for it. So it's when whoever is in charge. I don't know that there's a way that the government could be in charge of that without completely limiting all of our speech.
Well, here's just something that, as you're talking, I thought of was, right now, we have a free press. What should be the role of a free press in all of this? Is the press still the guardrail that what I think once was, but now it has been so, reputation has been so damaged that, I'm going to hand it over to David. He has an interesting statistic here.
Right. So in terms, the role of the media, which I think is critical, and I think the New York Times, if you looked into some case law during the Nixon administration, I think most would tell you that they played a very critical role in being that guardrail. But they had a poll of everybody in America, the role of the media. 69% said they were part of democracy, the fourth state, one of our institutions. 26% said enemy of the people. And not surprisingly, that split down party lines, but it's not 100% and zero on any one party. So what can they be? What should they be? They should certainly be a part of the democracy and the guardrail. But the perception might be the reality if we're like, well, I can't trust CNN, or I can't trust Fox, or I can't trust Rachel Maddow, or I can't trust Sean Hannity. So you just turn it off, whatever slice of the segment doesn't reinforce what you already think, or what your uncle on Facebook thinks. Can we get some questions from the students, maybe?
Like this, what's going on with the judge, she doesn't want to come to be questioned unless it's changed since I heard it this morning. I bring up something when she was 17 years old, she should have done it then.
And that's definitely what Wade was talking about in terms of the politicization of that process, which is the absolute opposite of what it should be, but it certainly is.
But she's part of, way past the politicalization of the Supreme Court nominee. The presidential candidates in 2016 ran on the fact that if they were elected, they would place on the Supreme Court the kinds of judges their party wanted. Until that's eliminated, nothing about the Supreme Court can go normally or appropriately to create a kind of neutral body that can help us sit through really complex cases. So that's a problem that what we have going on now with a woman claiming a sexual assault case, and she waited to have her being 500 years. It's not quite that simple. Her decision to disclose at this time is absolutely her right to do so. And how that's going to get sorted out, timing is sort of interesting. But apparently she didn't do it just now. She's done it quite some time ago. And it's just now been released by political people to the press. And it was leaked to the press, by the way, not by Feinstein's office. So this, how do we know who gets the scoop? Who gets the scoop?
And I think that the point that I was trying to make was with such a high office, I mean, with the Supreme Court justices that are appointed for life, they're appointed for life, and they should be the most neutral, and they should be interpreting the law. They're not supposed to advocate one side or the other. They're not supposed to lean one way or the other, or say, this is how I can shoehorn my opinion into the Constitution. They're supposed to be completely neutral with such a high office. If we created a official government review of what's on Facebook, those people probably would not go through nearly as much vetting, and they would be with all the other. My point was that with all the other ways that things are done, there's somebody who is appointed by the president who says, build a team, and then that person builds a team, and they will hire like-minded people, and then that will become who gets to do whatever job in the government. And if that team is supposed to regulate what's on Facebook, then of course it will reflect what they want. And so I think that's where I was trying to go with that point. Narrows back into this.
Yes.
Is there anything being done to like politicians or somebody who loses office because of fake news? Or, I mean, it's still freedom of speech, but you have people that, like I said, lose office or lose an election because news wasn't correct. And again, you said talk about
for a civil
opinion.
litigator.
I'm sorry, what was the last part of your question?
And like you said, there's also opinion, but there's also, I remember reading one time there was a political officer who lost out because a really high up news source put stuff out there that wasn't real, and it went to court, and the judge said, hey, nothing to do about it because it's free speech, but they lost office over that.
I don't know, well, that's an open question, and maybe an open question to you and your classmates and the others here is, what could be a potential remedy for that? Obviously, in the civil context, a person can sue for libel and slander. A public official has less room to sue there because the standard is so high that somebody has to prove have to have said something that was false with the knowledge that it was false, with the intention of harming them. It's a really high standard to kind of meet. But we have, this huge proliferation of, just on your TV probably today of attack ads on politicians. What did Michelle Lujan Grisham do today? I don't know. I'll find out at 5. But there's a question: do we want to hold people accountable for those sorts of false statements or reckless statements or slightly, skewed statements that take a fact and maybe present it in such a way that it doesn't necessarily come through as the way it was? I don't know of anything in place that prevents that kind of a situation, especially with regard to a political candidate or other public officials. It kind of goes with the territory. And it may have been that many years ago, the check on that was the citizenry. We had, an educated populace, or at least the argument goes that there used to be some more boundaries of decency, but they were self-imposed as opposed to coming from an outside source. Okay. And now those are slowly fading away as we're becoming more and more tolerant, that's my opinion, of less truthful information and more outright abusive or vicious sort of comments that are coming out. So it's a question of, where do we stop self-policing, because in times in the past that used to be more effective, and then somehow come up with a way to regulate that? I don't know that it's possible.
There's a couple of questions. There's one over here.
I was going to make a quick comment. I think that some of this goes back to the press, right? We're in the day and age where we just have one or two media conglomerates who own all the newspapers. And I think, 100 years ago, 150 years ago, there were more independent voices, and I think we've done away with some of the independent voices. And it's harder to be a critical thinker because there's not so many voices to listen to. It seems that we're not getting all the sides, we're getting one side or two sides and not 30 or 40 sides. So I think the lack of press is, once again, being the curb rail for democracy is interesting. And I guess that's most of where I want to come from. We still have a responsibility to seek out different voices so we can make more informed opinions. So we see those connections between the press.
Just really quickly to comment on that too, I even if you take out the NBC, Fox, or the conglomerates, and you focus on bloggers or even the smaller, I mean, you all know the links that you see in Facebook or whatever that are linked to some like, whatever daily press or something, and it's like you've never heard of that before. They're more interested in making money than associating things, and then it comes back again to the voters, to the informed, to not just click the clickbait and get bored with the story when it says next, but to Google it, to look up, to do your own research to confirm whether or not that's true, and to even see if the story that's there supports the headline that you clicked on.
There's one question right there, and then we're going to wrap it up. Go.
I don't know if it's like a question or a comment, but it kind of ties in with what both of you guys were saying, as I feel it does. But what I'm going to say is, like, nowadays on the news, you watch, these guys are like reporting what people said on Facebook. You know what I mean? Like the idea of news nowadays is we're going down here and we're going to tell you what Trump said on his Twitter feed and what this person said on their Facebook. So it's like now we're not even doing actual reports, and people are accepting it as news. And in a way, it is news in the fact that these people did say this, but the angle at which they stack those comments, the angle at which they come at you with this and that, they might be portraying this as to be true. But the fact of the matter is, it is true that these people put these comments on this section. Did they even address whether that stuff was true or not? Maybe, maybe not. I can't say for every single post ever out there. But it's funny because you hear a lot of this stuff about Facebook and all this social media stuff. But the thing is that our original sources of news, okay, we had the radio, I guess, before I was born. And then, we have the TV, the regular news. When I was younger, my dad was watching Fox News and stuff. And now if I go on and watch Fox News, I get to hear about WikiLeaks and what Facebook said about this and what this said about this. And it's just like, well, I can do all that stuff on my own. They just put one Google search video for me to do. So like, I can almost outcast news as a source of news from there. Now the definition has changed altogether. What is fake news? What is not fake news? Because news apparently is just something that happened. It is true it happened. Is it true what they said happened? You know what I mean? They're almost bypassing a whole step of research into going into this whole thing. So like when it comes down to Facebook and whatnot, then is it not so much are these stations going to be held accountable for what they say to be fact or not, but now we got to hold every individual person that's at least in a political stance or a power, what's the right word, like a leading position or something, you know what I mean? Something that can affect the world as a society, and then we got to look at, okay, how much does this person affect? Are they within the criteria, that basis to hold those people accountable? And it gets a whole lot more messy when it comes down to it, because these guys on Fox News and NBC and Good Morning America and all that, all they're doing is reporting what these people said. They did say those things, though. It's not that they're putting fake news out, it's that we're accepting whether or not those things are true that those people said. So we can bypass all that, look back into what the people themselves said. Now we got to wonder, okay, can Trump just get on his Twitter and put whatever he wants? Can this person who runs this company get on here and put whatever they want? Well, why can't we? If we can, why can't they? So it just brings up a whole new problem, because now every one of us has the right to get on our Facebook, log in, and say whatever we want. So now it goes into the whole world. You can't lie on your Facebook now, it's a law. You can't say this on Facebook, it's law. I think it's just a matter of understanding the credibility of sources when they're put out there, you know what I mean? Absolutely. We have to accept that that was a human being saying something. Are we going to believe it, or are we going to research it? If you can't research it, I guess deny it, or like not pay attention. I don't know, I'm not here to put anybody like this what they should do with it. But the fact of the matter is that anybody can say anything. You know what I mean? Yeah. And when it comes down to it, just because they're in a position of power, those social media outlets were originally made so we could post pictures of our dogs when they came out. And the news took those things and used them as a power play to shove information down people's throats. We accepted that. So the real thing is, maybe we shouldn't allow social media to be a source of news. Let's know what they're saying, what the source they're getting it from. Yeah. Looking at the parameters of what you're allowed to do on those platforms.
Thank you. I think that's, unfortunately, running short of time. I think that's a really great place to end, that it's really on, when it comes down to it, it's on all of us as the electorate to discern what's being put out there for ourselves. And it's getting harder and harder to do, but we have to be diligent. Thank you everyone for coming. Students, there is a sign-in sheet on a clipboard going around if you're here for extra